A Gift from Cyrus by Omid. Chapter 1. January 1981. Tehran, Iran. Damn it! Was it left or right? I had it all memorized, and I had rehearsed it 100 times. But I was so nervous that I couldn't remember any of it. I was supposed to remember which foot had to go first on each of the stairs in front of me with my eyes closed. Yet, in that pure darkness, I was standing on the 6th stair, clueless. I was sure that I had counted the stairs right. I must be on the 6th one. My mind was so blocked that I could not remember which side of the 7th was clear for me. I had only half a meter of free space on each stair to step on. It was pitch black and dead silent. I could feel my heart pounding all the way down to my toes. I could turn on the light to make my life easier, but it was the last thing I wanted to do. I was halfway up the staircase, so not only was it complete madness to go back all the way down to reach the light switch, even if I could, it would wake everybody up and ruin my whole month of planning for the night. For a couple of minutes, I just stood motionless in the brick staircase that would lead me to my destination, the roof. I thought maybe trying to calm down would help me to gain some focus. The only reassuring thought was that I had peed before starting my journey, so at least I didn't have to worry about that. The whole staircase was like a narrow single room going upward. It was separated from the rest of the house by a wooden French door. I had closed the door behind myself after I stepped onto the first stair. I knew I wouldn't have a major problem with the first stair. My challenge of the night was the second one, and then the third, and all the way to the last one, the lucky 13th. The air was cold and damp. The stairs were decorated with all sorts of useless stuff, stacked on either end of each step. Like a storage room abandoned for centuries, it was a burial site for old rugs, vases, pipes, containers of half-evaporated kerosene, and other more valuable items such as my uncle's engineering textbooks stamped with the Ohio State University logo. The most precious items up there were the pre-revolution magazines collected by my grandma. Having them and keeping them was a big crime in those early years of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. It was considered a sign of treason, showing that you had not cut your bonds and loyalties with the Shah's regime, and that you were still having feelings for anything before the 1979 revolution. Some issues of the magazines were special editions of the Shah's coronation ceremony, his weddings, and his biggest ceremony at Persepolis, among many others. For everybody else in the house, that staircase was just a forgotten storage room. Nobody had gone or had wanted to go to the roof for years, other than me. At the age of 14, I was practically the only man in my grandparents' house, since we moved in 5 years ago. Frequent trips to the rooftop to inspect the leaks had become one of my responsibilities by default. But that's not all it was for me. The flat mosaic-covered roof was a secret getaway when I needed a deep break from the rest of the world. 5 minutes had passed, and yet I hadn't made a decision where to put my foot on the 7th stair. I had to be careful where to step, and with which foot, otherwise I would crash into a pile of something covered with decades of dust. I came to the conclusion that thinking more would not help me at all. I had no choice but to bend over and touch the brick stair with my hands. The bricks were cold and dusty. I was about to lose my balance and make a big mess when I finally figured out that my left foot had to go first. The same scenario repeated 2 more times until I got myself to the top flat area in front of the door to the roof. Before opening the door, I stood there in the dark for a while in that frightening silence. I wanted to make sure that everybody was still asleep and my craziness had not woken anybody up. Other than a motorcycle that roared like a giant bee in the back alley, there was no sound. I slipped my hand on the door to find its cold brass knob. The wooden door, rotten by years of rain, was squeaking. I had to be very gentle with it, not to make any unexpected noise. I opened it slowly. The rush of cold air on my face made me question my sanity. It was just then that I realized what a long and difficult night I had in front of me. That same morning, I had been teased by my friends at school when I excitedly told them my plan for the night. Obviously, my plan was based off of my crazy passion for science. no matter how convincing I sounded, but it happens only once every 72 years. Their sarcastic, humiliating smiles were the only meaningful response I got. I tried hard to create some interest by saying, if we aren't dead, we will all be 86 years old the next time that a full moon eclipse of this magnitude comes back. My last try didn't work either. Still the same stupid look on their faces. I continued with less passion, assuming that we would even be interested to observe such a thing at that age. I stepped out of the door frame to the open area and looked around. It was a beautiful moonlight, casting a sharp shadow over everything and reminding me of the mission I had. I had my gear for the night already set up on the roof. Earlier in the day, I had secretly brought it all up here when I came home from school. I had my telescope, a notepad, and a pen to scientifically record my observations, a flashlight, and a blanket. And, of course, my precious digital watch with its glowing red numbers. I wish I could have had that flashlight with me at the bottom of the staircase, but it was too big and heavy to be hidden in my pants. My mission of the night required staying hours on that roof until the early morning. I knew that I would have a rough time up there on that flat roof in a cold, calm winter night. I walked to my designated corner where I could have the best view of the moon through the night. To get rid of any chance of being seen by the neighbors, I quickly lay down on my back on one end of the blanket and rolled the other end all around my body, facing the sky. It was a crystal clear night, 4 or 5 degrees above zero. My telescope, more of a toy and given to me by my grandpa, was one of the most valuable items I ever had back then. Although it was about 5 hours before the 3:12 a.m. full eclipse, I had my scope's tube pointed at the moving moon and kept realigning it every few minutes. It was like the eclipse would happen any moment, and I didn't want to miss it at any price. I couldn't recall any reason for me having to be up there so early, other than my excitement. I could not stay in my bed for hours and keep myself awake. Except for the annoying cold, it was a beautiful night with a gorgeous sky, without too many stars. It didn't take long, though, before I felt bored. I thought, why not sit instead of lying on my back? It was a slim chance that somebody would see me this late at night. I sat in the middle of the blanket and covered my back and my feet with the rest of it. It was then that I let my eyes wander to the neighbors' lit windows and what lay beyond them. But there was nothing to ease my boredom. Most windows were covered by thick, dark curtains or blankets from inside. After all, it was wartime. War with Iraq had just started several months ago. Their fighters had not yet attacked the capital city, Tehran, other than the airport, but everybody was advised to eliminate the chance of light leaking out of their windows. Every window was also decorated with a big X created by wide adhesive tape, crossing each glass panel from one corner to the other. It was suggested to do so to prevent the shattered glass from flying around if a bomb was dropped. Everybody knew that it had no practical use. People just copied each other to feel they had some sort of control over every aspect of wartime safety rules. No precautions other than this seemed to be taken. Only an hour or so had passed when I began to feel regret about my decision to come up here, but I was too stubborn to give up that easily. I stared at the moon again. In the early days of the revolution, people used to say that you would see the face of Ayatollah Khomeini, the revolution's religious leader, on the moon. I've always been amazed by how people fell for things like that. Maybe if one deeply believes in nonsense, it eventually makes sense. I was not tired yet, but felt cold and bored. The thought of doing basically nothing but shivering for another 4 or 5 hours made the challenge even more challenging. The excitement of a complete lunar eclipse, which happens every 72 years, was getting dimmer by the minute. The question that my friends asked this morning, "So what?" was getting more powerful. No, I had to see it. I had to tell them that I did it. I wanted to remember it for the rest of my life. I just had to be patient for another 5 hours. I kept saying to myself, "You can do it." I went back to the staircase inside a couple of times and stayed there in the dark so I could let a little bit of warmth seep back into my frozen body. Now I had my flashlight with me, and I was not afraid that its light might wake anybody up. While I sat there on the top stair, I began to move its light around the room, playing with the shadows. Having the flashlight in my hand took me back to what had happened a week ago. There was a big manhole at the very far corner of our school, behind the basketball court. In those crazy days of revolution, a huge cloud of mystery hung over that manhole. All sorts of conspiracy theories were created to try to explain its existence. The most attractive rumor was the one that connected the hole to the Savik, the Shah's secret service during his rule. The manhole was thought to be either a tunnel leading to a secret Savik space for interrogating anti-Shah activists, or else it was a secret tunnel to escape from Savik. Everybody was talking about it, but nobody had the guts to get inside and find out the truth. In fact, nobody was even allowed to get close to it, which added to the desirable mystery. It was last week that a group of my more adventurous friends had planned to finally discover its true purpose. One of them brought a huge flashlight, probably without his father's knowledge, and the other one had a hunting knife, definitely without his father's knowledge. They had planned to secretly make their way inside the hole during lunch break, but it never happened that day, or any other day in the years that I lived there. I never heard if anybody finally revealed the secrets hidden within the tunnel. I went outside again. It was still more than 3 hours before the eclipse would start. I looked around at all my surroundings to see if I could find at least one light on. All the buildings in the neighborhood were 2 stories, almost the same height. In fact, there were nights that for no reason, just to fulfill my teenage curiosity, I jumped from one roof to the other, going back and forth the whole length of the alley on the roofs. As I sat and looked around, my eyes began to close, and I eventually dozed off. I woke up around 5:30 in the morning. I can't remember if it was the sound of a cat whining on the other side of the roof, scaring me, or the anger and frustration I felt from missing the eclipse. But I couldn't move for a while, or maybe I was just frozen solid from the cold. I just lied back for a long time, regretting the torturous night that I had put myself through to experience nothing. The moon was still there. It had moved to the opposite side of the sky. It was very early dusk, but the moon was bright enough to laugh at me and my misery. I didn't catch even a second of the eclipse, which wouldn't be back for another 72 years. I couldn't have been more disappointed than I was in that moment. It was probably the first time that I had experienced pain to gain nothing. I moved all my eclipse gadgets to the staircase, secured them in a corner, and stepped down the stairs. As if I didn't have enough disappointment, I faced my grandma just as I opened the staircase door to get back inside the hall. I almost gave her a heart attack when the door opened and she saw a shadow come out of the dark. I didn't want to explain to everyone what I had been doing up there. It would be even more painful than missing the eclipse. I went back to my room and changed my clothes, so I could get myself out of that house to buy fresh bread for breakfast. As I changed and got ready to go out, I could hear the annoying static sound made by my grandfather's radio. It could be heard all over the house. It was his ritual every morning, noon, afternoon, and evening. He, like thousands of others, tried tirelessly every day to tune his radio to one of the foreign stations like BBC or VOA or Israeli radio. It was a very hard task, doable only with the hope for promising news about the Shah and his coming back to power. I barely remember anybody having ever heard a complete and clear sentence from any of those stations. The low quality of the transmissions and the interruptions made by the government didn't let anything through clearly. Regardless, every night's conclusion would be exactly the same, that the revolutionary Islamic regime would be overthrown in less than 6 months, guaranteed. I rushed to get out of the house. I knew that with the miserable morning I had had, a warm piece of Barbary bread covered with a layer of butter and honey would ease my pain. Even that early in the morning, I had to wait in line for about 15 minutes to get the bread coming fresh out of the oven. Each load from the oven contained about 30 Barbary flatbreads. The last batch had just been emptied, so everybody had to wait for the next load. Every morning, almost a quarter of the fresh hot bread was gone before I got home. I wasn't strong enough to resist the smell of it. It made my mouth water and my craving always defeated my willpower. It was just so satisfying in the early cold mornings. The only unpleasant part was when I had to hide the rest of the bread under my jacket to protect it from the flying dust particles that flooded the alleys, made by the early morning city sweepers. I never told any of my friends the real story of that night.